Hello and welcome to this week's class of 21st Century Judaism, a class where we learn about wonderful things, Torah, the depth of Torah, exciting new ideas, and refreshing perspective on life in general and living as a Jew specifically. This week's class is dedicated, insert your name here, by whoever you are. It is not yet sponsored. If you'd like to sponsor this week's class, please reach out to me, rabbi@jewisherie.com, or call 814-315-1344. Before we start, as usual, it's important to give tzedakah, to give charity. If you have a charity box, please grab a coin or a dollar bill and put it into the charity box. Or alternatively, if you have a mobile phone, smartphone, you can go onto your favorite banking app and you can give $1 or $5 or $50 or $7,000 to charity, which I'm going to do right now myself. Just take a minute. Let's see. I'll give it there. I'm going to give, continue, send. Boom. Tzedakah of the 21st century. Look at that. Okay. Let's get into today's class. This class, and I believe the following two classes, will be pre-recorded. It will not be live, and after the following week, will, God willing, resume the live in-person classes. Okay. Employer-employee relations. I employed someone in my company and laid him off due to financial circumstances. What responsibilities do I have to him aside from my contractual and legal obligations? Can sound like a very boring topic, but it's actually very interesting for multiple reasons. One of which is we're going to focus a little bit on a teaching of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father was a spiritual giant, to say the least. He, after the previous Lubavitch Rebbe left the communist Soviet Russia, I don't know if it made sense in English. Regardless, he was the practical leader of the Jewish people in communist Russia at the time, the Rebbe's father. And he kept Judaism alive in the most literal sense, and literally sacrificed his life, his comfort, and his life, more importantly, to keep Jewish life living for Jews around the land. And he was eventually arrested and tortured and went through awful things, and ended up he was sent to exile. He ended up in Almaty, Kazakhstan, where he passed away in 1906, if I'm not mistaken. So his yahrzeit, his anniversary of his passing, was just this Monday. And in connection with that, this week, it's an important day on the calendar. We're going to learn a couple of the teachings from the Rebbe's father. Rebbe's father was a renowned Kabbalist. He had a very interesting style of teaching Kabbalah and writing Kabbalah. It's fascinating even if you don't understand a word of what he's saying, just the way he presents it is absolutely mind-blowing. We might not see that so much in this week's class, but in general, I'm talking about. Okay. This week's Torah reading teaches us that a master must give their servants severance gifts when they are released. The Sefer HaChinuch, which we'll get to soon, has a surprising interpretation of this with contemporary ramifications. On this basis, the Rebbe issued a special call to employers, and we'll extend it to every person as well. Today's class is based on a talk from the Lubavitch Rebbe, printed in Likutei Sichos, which is the 39-40 volume set of the Rebbe's edited talks, volume 19, this week's Torah portion, Parshat Re'eh. Okay. So if you have the booklet, if you don't have the booklet, you can reach out to me, send me an email. I will send you a PDF of the booklet, no problem. Section A, page 3, compensating freed servants. Okay. Our Torah reading addresses the laws of servitude. So before we even begin, it's important to clarify something that there's a very big misconception about. Slavery, as we know it, the type practiced in the U.S. some 150 years ago, where people were kidnapped and sold into slavery, this is called by the Torah human trafficking, and is forbidden and is sometimes even punishable by death. That sort of slavery is completely forbidden by the Torah ever since we received the Ten Commandments some 3,335 years ago. The servitude spoken of in the Torah is something completely different. People attribute the word, they say the word, they hear the word slavery, they think of, oh, that's awful. Well, let's hear what slavery is in Torah. Servitude or slavery in Torah is when a person cannot support themselves and is given up hope of being able to do so. People in such a situation were allowed to sell themselves as servants in order to survive. Under this framework, they essentially sell their services as an aid or servant, and during the period of servitude, they are provided with food and shelter. This kind of servitude is permitted by the Torah, but it also comes with many restrictions and caveats. Firstly, it's limited to a 6-year term, no longer. And when this time is up, the servant must be sent home. Only if the servant insists on staying because life under the master is so good, may they stay. And even then, they're not allowed to stay past the Jubilee year. Every 50 years was known as the Yovel, or the Jubilee year. Once that year hit, all servants were freed, regardless of whether they want this or not. Now, if you keep when you hear the word slavery, you have this negative feeling inside yourself. And how could the Torah allow slavery? Hold on to that thought for a second. If you read in the words of the Torah describes the servant who does not want to go free after 6 years because he loves his master and his family. How does that work? If somebody's being so neglected and so looked down upon and treated so poorly as a slave, why would they want to stay a slave? What's the answer? Simple. It's not so bad. He's provided with food, shelter, and we'll see in a second, and it was much more than that. Being a slave is not simple business in Torah. Again, slavery, the way the world looks at slavery, and the way that Torah talks about slavery, or servitude is a better word maybe, are two radically different things. The Torah also details the living conditions that the servant must be provided with, as explained in the Talmud. For it is good for the servant with his master. That's the verse that says that. This means, says the Talmud, this means they are equal in regards to food and drink, that they must eat the same quality bread and the same quality wine. And the master cannot sleep on a bed while the servant sleeps on straw. If the master has a comfortable bed, so must the servant. I will just mention that the sages say that that one who acquires a servant for himself has acquired a master for himself. That's how sensitively the Torah treats somebody who is serving another human being, another Jew. It's not a matter of slavery, God forbid, of torture and of pain and of suffering. It's the best way that a person who can't afford anything, and most dignifying way for them to be taken care of until they're able to get on their own 2 feet. Essentially, the servitude described by the Torah is the adoption of an indigent person by a well-off family, which gives them money, shelter, food, occupation, care, and everything they need to live decently. Our Torah reading teaches us a mitzvah related to this servitude. When the servant's time is up, the master must give them parting gifts. This is the topic of today's class, the parting gifts. So let's read it inside. Source 1, Deuteronomy chapter 15. If your Jewish brother or sister is sold to you, they shall serve you for 6 years. In the 7th year, you shall send them free. When you send them free, you shall not let them go empty-handed. Lo teshalchenu reikam. Do not let them leave empty-handed. You must surely give them from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your vat, from what God has blessed you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and God redeemed you. This is why I am commanding you this today. So the verse explains the reasoning behind this obligation. Why? Because God gave us gifts when he freed us from Egypt. Let's see that inside. Source 2, compensation for Egyptian slavery. This is from the Sifri, which is essentially a Talmudic commentary on the Torah, on the 5 books of Moses. Talmudic meaning the sages of the Talmud, or actually earlier. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, says the Sifri. I gifted you, and again. You shall gift him, and again, meaning a second time. In Egypt, I gave you generously. You should do the same for your servant. As it is written, if you lie between the borders, the feathers of a dove covered with silver. That's a verse. The sages say this is the loot. This is referring to the loot from Egypt. And the verse continues, and its pinions with brilliant gold. This is the loot from the sea, after the splitting of the sea. We will make you rows of gold. This is the loot from the sea. With studs of silver, this is the loot from Egypt. So the Sifri describes how God gave the Jews a double gift. The first gift was when they left Egypt. God told the Jews to borrow gold and silver from their Egyptian neighbors. And the second gift was at the splitting of the sea. After the Egyptians drowned in the sea, the jewelry surfaced on the beach and the Jews collected it. The Sifri teaches that we must do the same for our servants. Just as the Jews received generous gifts from God, so too we should give generously to our freed servants. In legal terms, let's see source 3. This is Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, the laws of servants, chapter 3. One who sends their servant off empty-handed violates a Torah prohibition, as the verse states, you shall not let them go empty-handed. You will surely give them. This applies to both a servant who leaves after 6 years of work and to a servant who is leaving due to the Jubilee year. How much must they be given? Not less than the monetary equivalent of 30 selah, which is a Torah new currency. Whether the servant was beneficial or not, they must be given a severance gift. If so, why is it written, from what God has blessed you? This teaches us to give them commensurate with the blessing that they brought you. So Maimonides specifies a minimum sum to give servants when they leave, but not a maximum. What's the maximum? Give according to your blessing. 30 selah, by the way, is worth approximately currently 398 to 531 US dollars. Many of you might be familiar with the story of Joseph, one of the 12 Shevatim, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of the 12 leaders of the tribes. At age 17, he was sold into slavery and eventually became a slave to Potiphar, who was a minister in Egypt. After a year of devoted work for his master, he found himself thrown into prison after a false accusation made by his master's wife. After 12 years in prison, Pharaoh had a dream of which his advisors could not decipher. One of the ministers who knew Joseph from prison says that Joseph is a master dream interpreter, as he had showed in prison, as the Torah goes on at length to describe. Joseph is taken out of prison, deciphers the dream to Pharaoh's satisfaction, and is immediately appointed as the viceroy of Egypt. He did such a good job. Why are we bringing this up? Because it's going to be based on a teaching from the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father shows in the story of Joseph how Joseph, being that he was being freed from slavery, he was a slave to Potiphar, this minister. He went into prison and he was being freed as a slave from slavery, and he became even the viceroy of Egypt, second in command. Because he's being freed, God orchestrated it, Hashem orchestrated it, that he should receive severance gifts. Very interesting stuff here. Get ready. Source 4, Notes of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson from Torat Levi Yitzchak, page 120. The Rebbe's father cites another example in the Torah where a freed servant receives a gift. Joseph was a Jewish servant. As the verse states, a young Hebrew servant was with us. When he was released, he needed a severance gift because he was a slave. Let's see Genesis chapter 41 for a moment. Pharaoh removed his ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's hand. He attired Joseph with garments of fine linen and placed a golden chain around his neck. He had Joseph ride in his chariot of second rank, and they called out before him, "This is the king's patron." Pharaoh appointed Joseph over the entire land of Egypt. Says the Rebbe's father, continuing, source 4b, we're on page 4, by the way. In addition to the ring, the golden chain, the fine linen, and the chariot, Joseph's primary severance gift was what God granted him. The angel Gabriel came and taught him 70 languages. When he wasn't able to learn them all, he received an additional letter to his name from God's name, which is spelled, we can't pronounce it, but it's spelled Yud, followed by a Hey, and then a Vav, and then a Hey, if you know a little Hebrew alphabet. So a Hey from God's name was granted to Yosef, and his name became Yehoseph. If you look in the Torah, you won't see that name. You'll see it just as written as Yosef. Yosef is the Hebrew word for Joseph. He is referred to as Yosef, but if you look in Psalms, you'll see there's a couple of that he's referred to sometimes as Yehoseph with an extra Hey. for this reason. Let's see that inside in the Talmud Tractate Sota, where this reference is elaborated on. Source 6, page 5. Rabbi Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, when Pharaoh said to Joseph, "And without you no man shall lift up his hand or his foot in all of the land of Egypt," Pharaoh's astrologer said, "You would appoint a servant whose master bought him for 20 silver coins to rule over us? That's it." Pharaoh replied, "I perceive ginune malchus. I perceive royal characteristics in him. I see that he was not really a slave to begin with." They said to him, "If that is so, and he is a child of royalty, he should know the 70 languages that all the king's children learn." The angel Gabriel then came and taught Joseph the 70 languages, but he could not grasp all of them. Gabriel then added one letter, the letter Hey, to Joseph's name from the name of God, and then he was able to grasp all the languages. As the verse states, he appointed it in Jehoshaphat, for a testimony. When he went forth against the land of Egypt, the speech of one that I did not know, I heard. The next day when Joseph appeared before Pharaoh, he answered Pharaoh in every language that he spoke to him in. I will just add over here, it doesn't say it here, but just add an interesting point. The angel Gabriel, Joseph actually, he knew 7 languages, but there was one language that he knew that Pharaoh actually did not know, which was Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, Biblical Hebrew. And the Talmud actually, right after this, describes how every language that Pharaoh spoke to Joseph in, Joseph responded no problem in the same language. And then Joseph turned the tables and said something to Pharaoh in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue. And Pharaoh didn't know what to say because he's never heard this before. And he didn't want anybody to find out, so he made a whole deal with him. It's a very interesting story, but it's not for now. So Joseph's gifts were more than Pharaoh's jewelry and clothing. He learned 70 languages in one night. In other words, because looking at it on a Kabbalistic level, the Rebbe's father points out to us that because Joseph was a slave, Torah says the slave has to be given severance gifts when they're freed from slavery. That being the case, Joseph also had to receive severance gifts. He received severance gifts orchestrated by Hashem through Pharaoh, but he also received from Hashem. He received the jewelry and the fine clothing from Pharaoh, but he also received this gift of the 70 languages and also the letter Hey added to his name from Hashem. But there's an interesting question we can ask. There was one person who seemingly should have been giving a gift to Joseph, but had not. Pharaoh gave him jewelry. Gabriel, on behalf of Hashem, gave the 70 languages and a Hey, the letter Hey. But Potiphar, the minister who was the master over Joseph, why didn't he give anything? He was the actual master. The master is obligated to give severance gifts. Yes, the Torah was not yet given. Potiphar wasn't Jewish. He wasn't obligated in this in the first place. At the same time, on a Kabbalistic level, Hashem arranged that Joseph should receive these gifts because he was being freed from slavery. So it seems logical that Potiphar should be the main person who was giving a gift. So the Rebbe's father addresses this. Fascinating answer. Potiphar did give Joseph a gift. What did he give him? Source 4c. If the master must give a gift, where was Potiphar's gift? Potiphar's gift was giving his daughter Osnat's hand in marriage to Joseph. Joseph married Potiphar's daughter. Her name was Osnat, or Osnas. Source 7, Genesis 41. He gave him Osnat, the daughter of Potipharah, who's the same person, Potiphar and Potipharah, and there's a reason why the Torah modifies his name a little bit, calls him Potipharah, not for now. He gave him Osnat, the daughter of Potipharah, the governor of On, as a wife, and Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. So in other words, Potiphar gave him the most precious gift of all, his own daughter. So in summary, the Torah commands the severance gifts be given to servants when they are freed. We see this twice in the stories of the Torah. One, when the Jews left Egypt and were freed from bondage, Hashem gave them a double gift. And two, Joseph, Potiphar's servant, received many gifts when he was released from prison and servitude. I will point out now here, before we get to the next section, if you do have any questions, please feel free to email me. I will try my best to answer. You can ask whatever you want, even if it's not related to the topic. During a class, when it's live, I ask that this kind of stays on topic, just to address the direct questions related to the class. But if you want to email me and ask all the questions you'd like. Section 2, or Section B, actually. Why give severance pay? We're on page 6. So when one acquires a servant, they must pay them the agreed upon sum. They're paid. assuming the master was honest and paid up, why do they also need to give a parting gift? What's behind this mitzvah? Maybe the person is already being paid. So what's the purpose of this additional pay? It's a bonus. What is it? So let's go to the Rebbe's words. The Rebbe analyzes this. Two opinions. There are two ways to define the mitzvah of severance pay. It just now occurred to me. I usually have a microphone to make the quality of the audio a little better, and it just occurred to me that I forgot to set it up. As long as you can hear me, I think we're fine. Okay. So there are two ways to define the mitzvah of severance pay. One, the severance is a form of payment, the form of payment for the work done. According to this definition, this perspective, the Torah is instituting a law requiring that the master make an additional payment in addition to the payment already given for the work itself. So according to this approach, this mitzvah is a divine decree requiring the master to make an additional payment after the work period is over, in addition to the agreed upon payment for work. In other words, it's a divine decree without any human logic. It is not something we can wrap our minds around. It is not subject to rationale. This is a divine decree. Hashem decided that this is what should be, and we can't understand it. He's paid for his work, and then he's given additional pay. Why? Because Hashem said so. That's why. Okay. That's one way to look at it. Another alternative look is the severance is a form of charity. It's a charitable act. The master is instructed to make this payment in appreciation for the servant's work. According to this definition, severance is a logical requirement. It's kind of like a bonus. So according to this approach, the mitzvah of severance pay is logical. It's a form of charity to make the servant feel good. It isn't a special divine decree without logic. It makes sense. In another address, the Rebbe emphasizes the feelings of the servant who's being freed. This is source 8, page 6, the Likutei Sichot, volume 24. The freedom is complete when the servant doesn't leave empty-handed. In other words, the parting gift completes the freedom with a special gift. This brings him to a feeling of freedom and largesse, the opposite of servitude. I'm almost positive most of you have not heard that word before. I haven't heard it until I'm preparing this class. The opposite of servitude. It's a part of it's finalizing the freedom. Freedomizing, that's not a word. I'm sure there's a word for this. Freeing process. What is Maimonides' opinion? We love Maimonides. Maimonides is the man. A large bulk of Jewish law, Jewish practice, is based on Maimonides. There's three main pillars of Jewish law. There's Maimonides, the Rambam, Rabbeinu Asher, the Rush, and the Rif, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi. On these three people is laying all of Jewish practice for the most part. So we are always concerned with Maimonides' opinion. Besides, in addition to that, but he's also somebody to really delve into what is he saying, where is he coming from, what is he getting at. So Maimonides' opinion, says the Rebbe, what is Maimonides' position regarding the is severance pay? Is it an illogical, not illogical, is it a super rational, super logical, above logic decree, divine decree, or is it something that makes sense? It's like you're showing appreciation for the work that the servant did for you. We can deduce the answer from the fact that in Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of mitzvahs compiled, authored by Maimonides, Maimonides lists the mitzvah of severance pay immediately following the mitzvah of charity, of tzedakah, and not with the mitzvot pertaining to servitude. The implication is that Maimonides maintains that the severance gift is a form of charity. We'll see it inside. Maimonides Sefer HaMitzvot, source 9, page 7. Maimonides defines the mitzvah. So we're going to see three mitzvahs in a row in his book. Positive mitzvah 195. God commanded us to be charitable and strengthen the needy and be generous to them. Even a needy person who lives off of charity must also give charity to others, whether to one worse off than they or someone in a similar situation, even if they can only give a little. That's mitzvah number 195. What's the very next mitzvah after charity? Mitzvah 196. God commanded us to give severance pay to a servant and to not let them go empty-handed. 197. God commanded us to lend to the needy, to alleviate their burden by lending to them generously. This is the highest form of charity. Look at that. Maimonides is, you can't fathom. You have to analyze his works to see. His writing is very, very, very thought out. very, very punctual, very meticulous, very exact. Everything has a reason. Why certain things are in a certain order, why a certain law is in one location, but it's not in another location, the words that are used. We see here the order that Maimonides lists the 613 mitzvos also has a very deep logic to it. In this case, we see mitzvah 195 is charity. Mitzvah 197 is to lend to the poor, which is a form of charity. Right smack in between is the mitzvah of severance pay. Now, the laws of servitude are in a different section in the book. There, Maimonides doesn't mention this mitzvah. It's very clear that according to Maimonides, he holds that it is a form of charity. Form of charity. The Rebbe continues and notes that we can make a similar inference from the order of the verses in the Torah, which may in fact be where Maimonides had learned this from, that severance pay is a form of charity. Said the Rebbe, it can be suggested that Maimonides is following the order in the Torah itself, where the mitzvah of severance appears in the proximity to the mitzvah of charity. This may itself be the source for defining severance as a form of charity. Let's see it inside Deuteronomy chapter 15. If there will be a needy person among you, from one of your brothers in one of your cities in your land that God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, and you shall not close your hands from your needy brother. Rather, hear the words, you shall open your hand to him, and you shall lend him sufficient money for his needs that he is lacking. What are the next words? What are the not the very next words, but the words nearby in the Torah portion? If your Jewish brother or sister is sold to, they shall serve you for 6 years. In the 7th year, you shall send them free. When you send them free, you shall not let them go empty-handed. You shall not let them go empty-handed. You must surely give them from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your vat, from what God has blessed you. From the order of these verses, we see that the mitzvah of severance is right next to the mitzvah of charity. And this severance gift is not mentioned in the mitzvah or near the laws of servitude. Why is the question of whether severance pay is considered charity or a divinely required extra payment to the servant important? Why is this, how do we say this in English? I have a word in Hebrew, but it's not going to help you though. Why is this question, let's keep it simple. Why is this question of how do we look at the severance pay? Is it something it's a godly decree that we can't understand, or is it something that's logical? It's a form of charity. It's like a bonus, something to show appreciation. Why does it matter? Practically, he still has to give the servant severance gift. What's the difference? Why it's like this? Section C, modern day severance. Okay, there's no servitude nowadays. There's no what the Torah describes as slavery. We can't do it anymore. We'll see soon. Does it have any ramifications in our life in 2023? So in this address, a different address, the Rebbe delves into the legal parameters of this mitzvah. We won't get into this in our class, but we will mention one point that the Rebbe brought up, which stems from the recognition that severance is a form of charity, which we are expected to give. The Rebbe cites the Sefer HaChinuch, who maintains that the mitzvah of severance pay has contemporary relevance. The Sefer HaChinuch, as we're about to read, is a mitzvah which the author of which is unknown. We don't know who wrote it. There's different suggestions, there's different theories who wrote it, but we don't know for certain who wrote this book. At the same time, this Torah book was fully accepted by the Jewish people as a real thing, and it's a very when we say books of Torah, we're not just referring to the 5 books of Moses. We're referring to all works of Torah literature, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the writings, the Mishnah, the Talmud, Kabbalah, real Kabbalah, Zohar, the writings of the Arizal, Chassidus, Midrash, all these things are under the umbrella term Torah. Sefer HaChinuch is part of this. The Sefer HaChinuch is a very interesting book. The Sefer HaChinuch literally means the book of education. The manner in which it was written, you can tell from the way it's written that it's written as a writing from a father to his son to educate them about the mitzvos of the Torah. There are 613 mitzvos. I think we mentioned this in a previous class. The sages say there are 613 mitzvos in the Torah. If you count how many times God commands us to do something in the Torah, you'll find much more than 613. So there's some sort of criteria. There's something special about this number, this count, 613, but there must be some sort of criteria, some sort of guidelines. What is part of this count and what is not part of this count? Is every single mitzvah part of it? Clearly not. So Maimonides has a book we just read from, Sefer HaMitzvot, the book of mitzvot. He lists a criteria, guidelines, a list of rules, what allows for, not allows, what definition does a mitzvah need to have in order to fit into this list? And he lists off all 613 based on those criteria. Sefer HaChinuch has a different count. Many of the mitzvahs are the same, but he has different criteria, so he has a different count. So let's see the Sefer HaChinuch, mitzvah 482, which is the severance gift. Let's see how he words it though. To gift upon the servant's release. This means to give from what we have to our servant who is going free. We cannot send them off empty-handed. We know this so far. From the possible reasons for this mitzvah is that it should develop exceptional character traits in us that will drive us to do good. God, in his goodness and his desire to do good for his people, wished that we show compassion to those who served us and give them something of ours as a gesture of kindness, in addition to the originally stipulated wages. This is a logical idea, and we do not need to elaborate on it. So we see Sefer HaChinuch is very clear on this. It's not an irrational, it's not irrational, it's not a super rational decree. It's something that we can appreciate. That makes sense to us. This mitzvah was applicable to men and women in temple times, for the laws of servants only apply when the Jubilee year is marked, as I have previously written, says the Sefer HaChinuch. So strictly speaking, this mitzvah does not apply anymore nowadays, because we can no longer acquire servants according to Torah law. This was only possible when when most of the Jewish people lived in Israel, and when each tribe lived in its allocated territory. After the destruction of the Holy Temple, this was no longer practiced. Something I just want to point out, I've mentioned this many months ago, probably in the past, but it's an important thing to keep bringing up over and over and over. When something was being done by the Jewish people, a certain mitzvah, a certain practice, and at a certain point in time, this practice, this mitzvah stopped. The reason why it was stopped is not and cannot be because it got too hard to do. No matter how hard the mitzvahs are, we have to always strive to do the mitzvahs, and we can always do them, even if it gets really difficult, really uncomfortable, and so on. If we have stopped doing a mitzvah, this is because according to Torah law, according to the code of Jewish law, this mitzvah can no longer be done for the time being. So for example, offering sacrifices in the temple. Those sacrifices are not something that somebody just came along and said, hey, let's offer sacrifice. Let's take some animals and make some sacrifices. The Torah prescribes that we have requirement to make certain sacrifices, to bring certain sacrifices in the temple, some of them on a daily basis. The only place in the universe that these sacrifices can be offered is in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Nowhere else. So when the temple was destroyed, we could no longer bring any sacrifices. It wasn't because, it's so hard to bring a sacrifice now. Forget it. No, forget it. The Torah, the same Torah that says bring a sacrifice, says if there's no temple, don't bring a sacrifice. Until God willing, we'll have the third temple be rebuilt speedily in our days with the coming of Mashiach, and then we will offer sacrifices again. So the servitude laws don't apply anymore for a similar reason. But here's the kicker. Here's what the Sefer HaChinuch ends off with. Nevertheless, we're on page 9. Even nowadays, a wise person will learn a lesson from this, that if one employs a Jew for a long or even a brief period, they should give them severance pay at the end of their employment. The Sefer HaChinuch presents a revolutionary idea. The reasoning behind the commandment should inform our current business practices. A Jew who employs somebody, a job, not servitude, a job, even for a short while, should give the employee severance, a parting gift, monetary gift. It makes no difference if they were a servant for years or an employee for several hours. They should be paid severance beyond the contractual obligations so that they can leave with a smile. This is the Jewish way to do things. So let's see the Rebbe's words. Beyond the contract. The following directive should be publicized. When a person hires someone to work for them and the period of employment ends, and all the more so if the worker was laid off because the position became redundant and it was no longer necessary to work there because they had enough staff or whatever it is. And even if they were laid off because they weren't working satisfactorily, they should be paid severance. Since the severance is a form of charity, it is clear that we cannot suffice with the severance we are legally obligated to provide. The employee must certainly be paid in full the wages they deserve for their work, of course, and even any additional payments that the employer committed to pay cannot be considered as this charitable severance, because as obligations, they cannot be considered as charity. This applies both to long-term and short-term employees, as the Sefer HaChinuch writes. It also, page 10, it also doesn't matter if the employer was pleased with the employee's work or not. The household was blessed through them or not. The household was not blessed through them. Severance should be paid fitting, commensurate to the length of employment. However, when the, quote, the household was blessed through him, the severance should grow accordingly from what God has blessed him. Wow. So the Rebbe is making a public call to be scrupulous in observing the mitzvah of severance paid by our employees. It doesn't matter how long they worked or how pleased we were with their work or how pleased we weren't with their work. We need to give them severance pay so that they leave with positive feelings. The Rebbe emphasizes that he isn't talking about payments that were agreed upon in advance, but to going beyond, giving a gift what that can be considered a form of charity, something extra. Of course, the happier the employee is with the work done and the more divine blessing it brought him, the more generous they should be with the severance gift that they give to their employee. Can you imagine the scenario? There's a CEO, a boss, he has a few workers, and they're not doing a good job. They're working for literally the fourth day on the job, and they're really messing up. They're lazy, whatever it is. He comes to the person and says, I'm sorry, the work that you're producing is not sufficient for what is needed in this factory, in this job. I've already told you this a couple of times, but this was your final warning. You are no longer employed by us. This CEO should give the payment this person deserves for working for 4 days, the hours, any extras that might be involved in that as well. But he should also give him a special parting gift, an extra $100, extra $1,000, whatever makes sense in this situation, according to the blessing that was brought to this company, to the CEO, to this employer. This is a Jewish way of doing things. To always leave off on the right foot, even something that might be a little uncomfortable, might feel a little icky, should always try to end off on a positive note, even if it doesn't make sense. It's a good point. It's a good thing to do, and it's important to do. And the Rebbe is calling that we should all follow through. Those of us who aren't employers, perhaps we can take a lesson that. One second. About that. So it's another thing in our interpersonal relationships. It's a funny word, it's a fancy word, but when we're talking to people, we're dealing with people. Oftentimes we feel I have a requirement as a human being, as a Jew, to be a certain way with other people. I have to be kind, I have to be giving and generous and loving to what I am required to do. The Torah comes and educates us. Go a little bit beyond your comfort zone. Be a little more generous, a little more kind, a little more positive with people than you are required to be. Don't suffice with what you're required to do. Go beyond that and give and be kind and be positive in a much bigger way than you think is necessary. We're going to end off with it's a 10-minute video. I'm going to post the link in the description because when you play videos on Zoom, it's not necessarily so easy to watch. It might be a little distorted, but it should come through more or less fine. But I'll put the link in the description. You can watch it yourself on YouTube. Beautiful video. It's incredible. It's a really incredible video. I think you're really going to enjoy it. It directly, in a very direct way, highlights the content of this class. It was a CEO named Aaron, I'm going to pronounce his last name wrong. Feuerstein, I think his name was. I think he's still alive. And you know what? I'm not going to speak. I'll let you watch it yourself. Let's play it on the screen over here. Share sound, optimize your video clip, share. Okay, I think everybody can see. Second. Okay, get ready, get set. Here we go.
It started around 8 o'clock.
Explosion boomed into the night. Spectacular. General building still burning.
You can still see the orange glow. It's just no way to quantify this.
On December 11th, 1995, at 8 p.m., a boiler exploded in the largest textile factory in America at the time, the Malden Mills. It burnt the entire factory to the ground. The fire was so big, it could be seen from miles away, and it took an entire week to put out the fire completely. At the time, Mr. Aaron Feuerstein, the owner, the CEO of the company, was celebrating his 70th birthday. In the middle of the party, one of the executives ran over to him and said, Mr. Feuerstein, there's a fire at the mill. By the time he got there, the factory that had been built by his grandfather in the early 1900s was mostly gone, which meant that overnight, 3,000 employees who worked at Malden Mills lost their job. As far as Mr. Feuerstein was concerned, he was about to collect close to $500 million from the insurance company. He was faced with the following decision. Either close the company and pocket the money, or he can rebuild the company down south and hire cheaper labor over there and still make a lot of money. Either choice would have been common practice amongst CEOs at the time. Everybody expected for Mr. Feuerstein to do the same. The next morning, Mr. Feuerstein called a press conference. Thousands of people were crammed and jammed into this huge auditorium. Senators, politicians were there. And in front of everyone, he gets up and he makes this stunning announcement. He pledged to rebuild the factory right here in Massachusetts, bigger and better than ever before. And not only that, he continues and he says, every single one of you will continue receiving your monthly paychecks until it's rebuilt.
All our employees will be paid their full salaries.
The entire place erupted. There was so much emotion. It was charged because people were so anxious and nervous up to that point, thinking they lost their livelihood. And all of a sudden, the saint of a man gets up and he pledges and he promises that they have nothing to worry about. News media outlets showed the footage of him making the announcement, and they also showed people waiting online afterwards to pick up their paychecks. It made national and international headlines.
You'll receive your bonuses and everything today.
He was interviewed by dozens of news media outlets, and they asked him, they said, why would you even do that?
My father, who was a very observant Jew, taught me, and I still remember his quotation, which was, Bimkom she'ein anoshim, in those circumstances where there is a moral vacuum, hishtadel liyos ish, do everything within your power to be a man. And that's what he instructed his children to do, and that's what I'm trying to do.
The President of the United States, Bill Clinton, in 1996, invited him to the State of the Union and sat him next to the First Lady and honored him, calling him periodically afterwards to ask him for business advice, recognizing that here was a man who didn't see money as the end of it all, as the bottom line.
Some might have said the proper business decision for a 70-year-old guy is to take the $300 million in insurance and retire.
And what would I do with it? Eat more? Buy another suit? Retire and die? Huh. No, that did not go into my mind. That was not an option, not for a second.
I was only 14 years old when this happened. But recently, when I heard about it again, I wondered, is Mr. Feuerstein still alive? Can I interview him? Can I meet him? And maybe even can I get a blessing from a great man like that? I made some calls, and I found that he lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. He's alive and well. He hasn't given an interview in 25 years. He said yes. I took along my 12-year-old son, Shalom. We traveled to Boston. We came to the house of his granddaughter, Marika Feuerstein. He lives with his granddaughter, 95. Not a young man anymore, but completely healthy and completely with it. As I walked into his home and shook his hand, I can see in his eyes the wisdom, the life experience. And I was really excited to sit and talk with him. The first question I asked him, I said, Mr. Feuerstein, what gave you the courage, the strength to walk away from hundreds of millions of dollars and do what's right and treat the workers properly like human beings, take care of them?
First of all, the Torah. As a young man when I read and studied the Torah, that showed me the way of life. That was very, very important. Lo sa shok soche, not to oppress the worker. You got a lot of workers. Not to oppress the worker, because he's an oni and an evion. We considered him a human being, not a pair of hands. And there's a difference.
He said, my father was a great example. He was a big tzaddik. He also taught me to be a mensch. My
father was a tzaddik and had great influence over me. Today we see orthodoxy prospering, but when my father was a young man, orthodoxy was dying. And my father was the one who kept the Orthodox alive in Boston. The business was started by his father, Henry Feuerstein. He came over to this country in his teens, and he read in the Forward's Yiddish newspaper that there was a factory for sale in Malden. He went to see the factory. He knew nothing about knitting machinery, nothing about sweaters, nothing about anything, any product. He said, there's a place where I can go to shul, I'll be my own boss, and he bought it. And the business prospered, and by the time I got to the business, the Malden Knitting Mills was ranked AAA1 for credit, and they were worth millions.
I asked him about the employees when they returned to work at Malden Mills after it was rebuilt. They increased productivity by 40% without a wage increase, just as an expression of gratitude to Mr. Feuerstein and what he had done.
We had good employees. Many of them couldn't even speak English. But when treated like human beings, they were just terrific. They wanted me to succeed, and they increased employment without a wage increase.
Then I asked him a very difficult question. I said, Mr. Feuerstein, I know that eventually your company went bankrupt. Do you ever feel that had you not done that good deed and spent the tens of millions of dollars on the employees, paying them while the company was being rebuilt, do you ever feel like you would have had the money to continue going?
No. You have no right to defame God's name with your business or with your family, whatever your enterprise is. I was too enthusiastic. I should have gone slow. I wanted to go rapidly. And so I paid for it.
Something he was really proud of was the building of the Shul of Young Israel in Brookline, in Massachusetts. And he kept telling me, make sure you go see the Shul. A beautiful piece of architecture.
I remember as a young man, it was a fight to get a minyan in the shul. I wanted to have a shul that was not in the basement. I thought that was a bekovedik for God. If you want him to dwell in the house, you have to make a nice house. So we put together the money and we built an Orthodox shul. And it's something that God could walk into. I feel like some of the Jews who went to the Beis Mikdash years ago, I'm in the presence of God.
I couldn't help but feel the entire conversation with Mr. Feuerstein was just an incredible experience. I was sitting in front of a giant. He didn't look to sound good or to look good. He just looked to impart the wisdom that he had gained over the years and that he had lived by. And finally, I asked him, Mr. Feuerstein, bless me, bless my son. I'm in awe of what you have done, what you have accomplished, the decisions you have made.
May God bless you and make you secure. May God see you through security intellectually, most important. And he should give you, without all you do, the divine objective to spread Torah.
My son and I will never forget that interview, that experience. I said my goodbyes, we wrapped it up, we went back to LA. Shortly after we came back to LA, we got a call from the family. Mr. Feuerstein had passed away. I thought, if he hadn't given an interview in 25 years, why did he agree to do it now? I couldn't help but feel that Hashem sent me to Boston to do his story before he passed, so that the world could know.
ולא זכרנו שם קודשי ונקדשתי בסוף בני ישראל. I always kept in my mind that I should make it a Kiddush Hashem and not a Chillul Hashem.
Okay, wow. What a video, what a story. You see clearly, same thing, the same topic. Was he required to give all those employees their month's paycheck for months on end without working? He could have just closed down the company and moved on with life. But you see the beauty of this soul. He said, what am I going to do? Eat more, drink more, sleep more, get a new suit, retire and die. It wasn't even on his mind. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And looking forward to studying with you and teaching and learning and growing together next week. Wishing everybody a great Shabbos and much, much blessing.